owned a fancy toy store. A millionaire businessman in financial crisis tried to buy a teddy bear for his 5-year-old daughter, who was crying inconsolably. When his card was brutally declined in front of everyone, the prejudiced clerk laughed loudly and shouted, "The millionaire's card was declined." He was left completely paralyzed by the public humiliation, while his daughter cried even louder upon realizing what had happened. Then, a poor 6-year-old girl, watching through the window, walked into the store and did something that left everyone in shock. The air in the crystal carousel smelled of a wealth Richard Blackwood no longer possessed. It was a sweetish mixture of imported plastic, hypoallergenic plush, and the discreet but absurdly expensive perfume they spritzed on the carpets every hour. For a man who had built and lost a fortune before he turned 40, that scent was a cruel reminder of paradise lost. He adjusted the collar of his shirt, feeling the fabric, once a symbol of his power, now just a fragile facade. Every step he took on the polished marble floor echoed in his mind like a judge's gavel declaring his bankruptcy. His heart beat erratically, a cold anxiety crawling up his spine. It wasn't the fear of creditors or the shame before former partners. It was something infinitely more terrifying. It was the fear of seeing disappointment in the eyes of his 5-year-old daughter, Laura. Laura didn't understand stocks, risky investments gone wrong, or the collapse of a fortune that had once seemed inexhaustible. She only understood that her father, once a smiling giant who would lift her into the air, was now a silent shadow who spent his nights awake, staring at spreadsheets in a makeshift office in the dining room. Last week, she had drawn him as a little grey man with slumped shoulders under a rain cloud. That drawing had been a harder blow than losing millions in a single day on the stock market. That was why he was here, in this store that represented everything he could no longer afford, with the last vestiges of his money on a single credit card. His mission was simple and desperate: to buy a smile. His eyes found their target, a honey-colored teddy bear, sitting majestically on an illuminated shelf. It wasn't just any bear. It had button eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of happy childhoods, and a blue satin ribbon around its neck, Laura's favorite color. In another time, Richard would have bought the entire store without blinking. He would have created a playroom so vast it would make any child believe in magic. Today, the price of that single bear, a number printed on a small gold-foiled tag that made him swallow hard, represented a chasm between the father he wanted to be and the man he had become. He took a deep breath, gathered the fragments of his old self-confidence, and picked up the bear. The plush was soft, comforting. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine Laura's joy, her little arms squeezing her new friend. The saleswoman, a woman with a smile as polished as the floor, approached with a posture that exuded superiority. Her eyes scanned Richard's suit, noting the slight fraying at the cuff, the shoes that weren't the latest Italian design. She sized him up, not as a customer, but as an intruder. "May I help you, sir?" Her voice was melodious but cold. "I'll take this one," Richard said, his voice steadier than he felt, placing the bear on the glass counter. She picked up the toy with her fingertips, as if fearing contamination. She scanned the barcode and announced the price with unnecessary clarity. Projecting her voice just enough for other customers to hear, Richard felt their eyes on him. His hands grew damp as he pulled the card from his wallet. It was all he had left. His assets were frozen. His cash flow a distant memory. This small piece of plastic was his last bridge to normalcy. He handed it to her. She inserted the card into the machine with a slow, deliberate motion. The silence in the store seemed to stretch, thick and heavy. Richard held his breath, his eyes fixed on the small digital screen. Every second was torture. "Please, just this once," he thought, a silent plea to a universe that seemed to have turned its back on him. The machine emitted a sharp, shrill beep, A small red light blinked, insistent. The saleswoman's smile widened, twisting into a smirk of poorly concealed contempt. She raised her eyes to meet Richard's and, with cruel satisfaction, announced loud and clear, "I'm sorry, sir. Your card has been declined." The word "declined" echoed in the store's perfect acoustics, ricocheting off the glass shelves and the faces of the other customers. To Richard, it sounded louder than a fire alarm. A shameful heat rose up his neck, coloring his face a red he could feel burning under his skin. He saw a well-dressed couple a few feet away exchange a look of pity disguised as disdain. Richard's world, once a stage where he was the applauded protagonist, shrank to the size of that glass counter, and he was the sole actor in a play about failure. His days of vast wealth, of managing a fortune that seemed infinite, had turned to dust. The saleswoman, with a theatrical gesture, pushed the teddy bear to the corner of the counter, as if mere contact with Richard's situation could taint the toy. "Would you like to try another method of payment?" she asked, the false politeness in her voice cutting like glass. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What other method? He no longer had a checkbook with funds. His investments had gone up in smoke, and the little cash he had was reserved for rent and groceries. The truth was a lump in his throat. He couldn't afford a simple teddy bear. The humiliation was so palpable he could almost touch it. He just shook his head, a tiny, defeated motion. His shoulders slumped, the weight of months of stress and sleepless nights finally breaking through the facade he fought so hard to maintain. He just wanted to disappear, to run away from those judging eyes and the scent of a life that was no longer his. Laura's smile, which he had so desperately wanted to buy, now seemed like an unreachable mirage. It was then that a delicate sound broke the tension. The gentle jingle of a bell on the door, which he hadn't noticed before. A small, hesitant figure stood just inside the entrance, her wide eyes fixed not on the colorful toys, but on the scene unfolding at the counter. It was a little girl, maybe a year or two older than Laura. She wore a simple dress, faded from many washes, and worn sandals that barely protected her feet. Her dark hair was in two tight braids, and in her small hands she clutched a cloth pouch as if it contained the world's most precious treasure. She had been outside, her face pressed against the display window, and had seen everything. Now, with a determination that seemed too big for her frail body, she stepped inside. The saleswoman looked her up and down, her expression instantly souring. "What is it? If you're asking for a handout, this isn't the place." But the girl didn't look at the saleswoman. Her large brown eyes, full of a seriousness unusual for her age, were fixed on Richard. She walked slowly, step by step, to the counter. Richard, still paralyzed by his own shame, just watched her approach, a strange calm emanating from her. Reaching the counter, which was nearly her height, the girl stood on her tiptoes. With an effort, she placed her cloth pouch on the polished glass. The sound was soft, a muffled thud followed by the faint jingle of coins. She then turned to the saleswoman, her voice coming out clear and steady, cutting through the awkward silence. "I want to buy the bear for his daughter." She opened the pouch, revealing a collection of coins of all denominations and a few crumpled $1 and $5 bills. Carefully folded. It was the kind of money saved with sacrifice, coin by coin, over a long time. The saleswoman looked at the small fortune in disbelief, then at Richard, and finally at the girl, her mouth agape, unsure of what to say. Richard felt the floor drop from under him. The gesture from this unknown child was a wave of kindness so pure and unexpected that it threatened to break the dam of emotions he had been holding back for months. In that instant, humiliation gave way to an overwhelming, unfamiliar feeling, something that left him completely breathless. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioning. The saleswoman stared at the coins and crumpled bills on the glass as if they were a personal offense. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for a rule in the store's etiquette manual for such an impossible situation. Richard, meanwhile, felt like a ghost, a spectator at his own ruin. The girl's gesture wasn't just kindness, it was a mirror reflecting the depth of his failure. He, who had once prided himself on his business acumen and his ability to turn capital into fortune, was being bailed out by the generosity of a child who probably had nothing. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth, so strong it choked him. He wanted to say no, to refuse, to protect what little was left of his pride, but his body wouldn't obey. He was frozen, captive to the purity of the act. The girl, sensing the saleswoman's hesitation, pushed the pouch forward a little. "It's real money," she said with a simplicity that disarmed any argument. Her voice was quiet, but carried an unshakable conviction. With a resigned sigh and a look of pure contempt for Richard, the saleswoman began to count. She emptied the contents of the pouch onto the counter, creating a small mountain of coins and bills. Her long, perfectly manicured fingers moved with visible reluctance, separating the coins into small stacks. The metallic clinking was the only sound, a melancholy soundtrack to Richard's fall. Each coin counted was a blow to his ego. He saw shiny new quarters next to dimes dulled by time. He saw $1 bills so worn the creases seemed permanent. This wasn't just money, it was the materialization of small wishes postponed, of candy not bought, of daily sacrifices, a wealth of a kind he had never understood. As the counting continued, Richard's mind drifted. He remembered closing multi-million-dollar deals, discussing the profitability of hedge funds and the value of his stock portfolio with other men in suits. He remembered the arrogance he felt watching the dividends roll in, planning investments in gold or even crypto, always seeking more, always measuring his worth by the size of his net worth. Now, all that arrogance seemed childish. He stood there, a broken man, witnessing a capital of kindness that surpassed any balance sheet he had ever seen. The girl waited patiently, her small hands resting on the counter, her eyes fixed on the bear, as if to ensure it wouldn't escape. Finally, the saleswoman finished. She looked up, genuine surprise breaking her mask of disdain for a second. "It's exactly the amount," she murmured, almost to herself. A single quarter was left over. It was as if the universe was mocking him with cruel precision. Without another word, the employee, now with mechanical efficiency, placed the bear in a glossy paper bag with the store's golden logo and pushed it toward the girl. But the child didn't take it. Instead, she opened the bag, took the bear out, and held it with both hands, clutching it to her chest for a brief moment, as if saying goodbye to a dream. Then she turned to Richard. Her large brown eyes met his, and in them there was no pity, only a deep, painful understanding. She held the teddy bear out to him. His hands trembled slightly as he took it, the soft plush a stark contrast to his frayed nerves. The moment his fingers brushed against hers, the girl stepped a little closer and, in a whisper that was meant only for him, a secret shared in front of everyone, she said the words that shattered him into 1,000 pieces. "I've wanted one of these toys for a long time. I know how it hurts, but I can live without it. It's okay." The girl's words, so simple and so profound, hit Richard with the force of a revelation. It's okay. The phrase echoed in the void of his soul, where for months there had only been the noise of financial worries and the fear of failure. He looked at the child's face, at the ancient wisdom in her young eyes, and felt the facade of the businessman, the dethroned multimillionaire, crumble completely. The tears he had held back for so long, tears of frustration, of loss, and of overwhelming loneliness, finally found their way out. They burned in his eyes, a betrayal of his controlled posture, but he didn't care. Before this small giant, his armor of pride was useless. He clutched the teddy bear so tightly his knuckles turned white, the toy becoming an anchor in a sea of turbulent emotions. He wanted to thank her, to say something that could express the magnitude of what she had done, but words seemed small, insufficient. He could only manage a nod, a slow, heavy movement. The girl seemed to understand. She took a step back, picked up her solitary quarter from the counter, placed it back in her empty cloth pouch, and without a backward glance, walked out of the store. The bell on the door jingled again, announcing her departure, and she disappeared into the afternoon light, leaving behind a silence charged with meaning. Richard stood there, the bear in his arms, the humiliation of minutes ago replaced by a raw, disconcerting emotion. Gratitude, a gratitude so intense it hurt. He had paid for a smile for his daughter, but a stranger had received one instead. In the days that followed, the image of that girl wouldn't leave his mind. He gave the bear to Laura, who received it with a shriek of pure joy, hugging it with the force of someone reuniting with a lost friend. Seeing her smile was like a balm, but the wound to his pride remained open. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with a world where a child had to sacrifice her savings to teach an adult a lesson in humanity. Curiosity turned into a need. He had to know who she was. He had to, somehow, repay the gesture. Not with money, for he now understood that was the poorest currency of all, but with something more meaningful. Driven by this new determination, Richard began to search. He didn't have much to go on, just the memory of a serious face and a faded dress. He returned to the toy store the next day, enduring the contemptuous glare of the same saleswoman, and asked if she knew the girl. The woman just shrugged. A lot of poor kids pass by here. They look at the window, dream a little. It's none of my business. The coldness of her reply only strengthened Richard's resolve. He started walking the streets of the neighborhood, an affluent area he had only known from the window of his armored car. Now, on foot, he saw the contrasts he had previously ignored, the mansions with their high walls and, just a few blocks away, the alleys and side streets where life was harder. It was in a small park, hidden between luxury apartment buildings, that he saw her. She was sitting on a concrete bench, sharing a small piece of bread with the pigeons. Richard approached slowly, his heart pounding. He didn't want to frighten her. "Hello," he said, his voice soft. The girl looked up, recognizing him immediately. A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Hi," she replied. He sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "My name is Richard. What's yours?" "My name is Sophia," she said. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the pigeons. Richard struggled to find the right words. Finally, he said, "What you did in the store, that was the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. I wanted to know why." Sophia shrugged. "You looked sad, and your daughter needed the bear. It was that simple." Through a careful conversation, he learned the truth. Sophia's father had passed away a few years ago. Her mother, Helena, worked 3 different jobs to make ends meet. A cleaner in an office building during the day, a waitress in a small cafe at night, and she did laundry for a few families on the weekends. They lived in a small rented apartment several blocks away. The money in the pouch was everything Sophia had saved for over a year, collecting coins she found on the street and the little her mother gave her. She was saving up for a simple tablet so she could study better. Hearing that, Richard's heart broke. The girl had sacrificed her dream of a better future for the smile of a stranger, and he, who once had a net worth of millions, had become the recipient of such an immense sacrifice, of an investment in goodness he didn't even know how to begin to repay. The revelation about Sophia's sacrifice left Richard in a stupor. He walked home that afternoon feeling smaller than ever. The weight of his financial losses, which had once consumed him, now seemed trivial compared to the magnitude of the moral debt he felt he owed this family. The luxury of his home, though diminished and threatened by creditors, suddenly seemed obscene. Every piece of art, every designer chair was a silent testament to a life of excess. While just a few miles away, a woman struggled with 3 jobs and her daughter gave up her future for an act of compassion. The image of Sophia sharing her bread with pigeons contrasted painfully with memories of business dinners where expensive entrees were left half-eaten. The disparity disgusted him. The next morning, driven by an impulse that was no longer just gratitude, but a visceral need to do something right, he went to the supermarket, not one of the gourmet markets he used to frequent, but a wholesale club on the outskirts of the city. He filled 2 carts with basic necessities: rice, beans, oil, flour, milk, vegetables. He also bought a few things he imagined a child would like: boxes of colorful cereal, cookies, yogurts. He paid with the little cash he had left from an emergency loan, capital that was supposed to last him the rest of the month. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about interest rates or cash flow. He was thinking about dignity. With his car's trunk crammed full, he drove to the address Sophia had given him. It was a plain building with peeling paint on a busy, noisy street. He walked up the flights of stairs, feeling like an intruder. His heart pounded as he stood before their apartment door. He hesitated, his hand in the air, unsure if he was doing the right thing, if he wasn't just offending their pride with his clumsy charity. Before he could knock, the door opened. Sophia stood there, her eyes wide with surprise. But something was wrong. Her small face was stained with tears, and her shoulders trembled with silent sobs. "Sophia, what happened?" Richard asked, panic creeping into his voice. The girl tried to speak, but the words were lost in her crying. She just pointed inside the apartment. Richard entered cautiously. The place was tiny, but impeccably clean and organized. A single room served as a living area and bedroom, with a mattress on the floor and a small sofa covered by a colorful blanket. The kitchen was a nook in the corner, and it was nearly empty. The doors of the few cabinets were open, revealing bare shelves. The floor was wet in spots, and there were shards of glass from a jelly jar swept into a corner. "What happened?" he repeated, kneeling to be at her eye level. In a choked voice, Sophia managed to explain. The night before, while her mother was at work and she was asleep, someone had broken the flimsy lock on their door. There were no valuables to take, no electronics, no jewelry. The thieves took the only thing of value they owned, their food. They took all the groceries Helena had bought with her hard-earned paycheck. They took the little that was keeping them going. Sophia had woken up that morning to find the pantry empty and the door forced open. She was alone, hungry, and scared. Her mother didn't know yet. She was at the first of her 3 jobs. Richard felt a wave of impotent rage against the injustice of the world, against the cruelty that preyed on the most vulnerable. He looked at Sophia's tear-streaked face, the same girl who had taught him about dignity the day before, now reduced to the most basic of miseries, hunger. The irony was crushing. He, the man who had lost a fortune, stood there, helpless, while a child cried for a piece of bread. But then he remembered the groceries in the trunk of his car. It wasn't a solution, it was a stopgap, but it was something. It was a start. "Wait here," he said, his voice firm for the first time that day. "I'll be right back, and I promise you, Sophia, you won't be hungry anymore." Driven by a compassion that had transformed into purpose, he went down the stairs, no longer a failed millionaire, but a man with a mission. Richard went up and down the building's stairs 3 times, his arms laden with heavy bags. The physical exertion, something he wasn't used to, was almost a relief, a way to channel the anguish and anger he felt. Each step was a reminder of his own fall, but also of his new, unexpected ascent as a human being. He arranged the food in Sophia and Helena's small kitchen, filling the previously empty shelves. The silence in the apartment was broken only by the sound of packages being opened and put away. Sophia watched him, her eyes still red from crying, but now with a glimmer of hope. When Richard finished, the small pantry was fuller than it had likely ever been. He even found a forgotten vase and placed a small sunflower he had bought on impulse inside. A splash of color in a world that had seemed grey. When Helena arrived late that afternoon, she found her daughter and a stranger sitting at the small table, sharing a sandwich. She stopped at the door, the weariness of a hard day's work etched on her face, which quickly turned to alarm and suspicion. She was a thin woman with calloused hands and a gaze that carried the weight of the world. "Sophia, who is this man?" Her voice was hard, protective. Sophia ran to hug her. "Mom, this is Richard. He helped me." Richard stood up. Feeling awkward under Helena's scrutinizing gaze, he explained the whole story, from the encounter at the toy store to what had happened that morning. He omitted the details of his own life, presenting himself only as a father who had been touched by her daughter's kindness. Helena listened in silence, her expression gradually softening from suspicion to exhaustion, and finally to a reluctant gratitude. She looked at the full kitchen, and her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "but we couldn't possibly accept all this." "Please," Richard insisted, "consider it a repayment. Your daughter did something for me that no amount of money can buy." In the following days, an unlikely bond began to form. Richard came back every day under the pretext of checking if they were okay. He helped Sophia with her homework, discovering with astonishment that the girl possessed a brilliant intellect and an insatiable curiosity. He listened to Helena's stories about her long work shifts, about the prejudice she faced for being poor, about her dreams of giving her daughter a better life. He found himself confessing his own struggles to them, the loss of his company, the pressure from creditors, the fear of losing custody of Laura. In that small living room, stripped of his suit and his former identity, Richard Blackwood, the tycoon, didn't exist. There was only Richard, a man learning to reconnect with humanity. The calm, however, was brief. The outside world, with its cruel rules, soon invaded their small refuge. One day, Helena came home early from work, her face pale and defeated. She had been fired from one of her jobs, the waitress position at the cafe in the wealthy neighborhood. The reason was surreal and devastating. Some wealthy patrons, the same types who frequented the toy store and saw him as the city's new pariah, had complained. They had seen her talking with Richard in the park, the bankrupt businessman. They gossiped to the manager, implying she was associating with people of ill repute, that perhaps she wasn't trustworthy. The manager, fearing the loss of his affluent clientele, dismissed her without a second thought. The loss of that job represented a third of the family's already meager income. It was a catastrophic blow. Richard felt his blood run cold. The help he had tried to offer had turned into a poison. His presence, his ruined reputation, was now actively harming the very people he wanted to protect. The gossip and prejudice of the elite he had once belonged to were a cruel weapon, and Helena and Sophia were caught in the crossfire. Guilt consumed him. He looked at Helena, who was trying to maintain her composure in front of her daughter, but whose hands were trembling uncontrollably. He was responsible. His attempt at redemption had created an even greater disaster, pushing them closer to the financial abyss. And as if that weren't enough, when he arrived home that same day, he found an official-looking envelope at his door. It was a notice. His creditors were losing patience. They were beginning the foreclosure process on his house, the last asset he had left, the last safe harbor for his daughter, Laura. The perfect storm was brewing, and he was at its center, dragging everyone he loved down with him. Richard's world collapsed in an avalanche of bad news. The foreclosure notice in one hand, the weight of Helena's firing in the other. He sat on the stairs of his empty, silent house, feeling panic rise like a cold tide. It seemed every step he took forward pushed him 2 steps back. The attempt to do good had resulted in more pain. He was toxic, a plague. His failure was no longer his alone. It was contaminating the lives of innocent people. The image of Helena, trying to be strong as her world crumbled, haunted him. And the possibility of Laura losing the only home she had ever known was a knife in his chest. He looked around at the walls that had once held laughter and dreams and felt like a complete imposter. What kind of father was he? Unable to protect his own daughter, unable even to help without causing more damage. Pride, that old destructive companion, whispered in his ear. Maybe it was better to walk away, disappear from Helena and Sophia's lives. Let them find a solution without his disastrous interference. Maybe he should just surrender, give up the house, let his ex-wife, with her financial stability, take care of Laura. It would be the easiest thing to do, to give up. But then, the image of Sophia's face, offering him the bear, flashed in his mind. It's okay. That girl's resilience, her ability to find light in the deepest darkness, was a silent rebuke to his urge to quit. He couldn't give up, not for himself, but for them, for all three of them, Laura, Sophia, and Helena. He spent the night awake, his mind racing. He went through his old contacts, but calls went unanswered, emails unreturned. The business world he once dominated now turned its back on him. No one wanted to be associated with a failure. In the morning, exhausted and hopeless, he went to see Helena and Sophia, perhaps to say goodbye, perhaps just to find the strength he lacked. He found them in the small kitchen. Helena had a lost look in her eyes, recalculating figures on a piece of paper that would never add up, no matter how she arranged them. Sophia, meanwhile, was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a few old broken toys. But she wasn't playing. She was taking them apart, studying their gears, trying to understand how they worked. Richard sat on the floor beside her, despair etched on his face. "I don't know what to do, Sophia," he confessed, his voice hoarse. "I think I've ruined everything." Sophia stopped fiddling with a wheelless toy car and looked up at him. Her serious eyes seemed to see right through him. "You didn't ruin it. The people who did that to my mum, they're the ones who are broken inside." She turned her attention back to the toys. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I was thinking, all these toys come from far away, in big boxes. It must cost a lot of money to bring them here." She picked up a rag doll her mother had sewn for her. "But this one was made here. My mom made it. It's my favorite." Richard was listening, but his mind was elsewhere, on the numbers, the debts, the impending custody battle with his ex-wife, who had just called to inform him her lawyers were filing for sole custody of Laura. Sophia continued, her childish voice weaving an idea with surprising logic. "What if you made toys here? Real toys, with wood and cloth. Toys that tell stories about our home. Kids would like them, and moms would too, because they would be cheaper. You wouldn't need ships or a lot of money to start. Just people who know how to make things with their hands, like my mom." Richard looked at her, a sad smile on his lips. It was a sweet, naive idea, a child's fantasy. "It's a nice idea, honey, but the business world is much more complicated than that." He was about to get up, to sink back into his despair, when his gaze fell on a detail he had never noticed before. Among Sophia's broken toys was a small, ingeniously assembled wooden object. It was a miniature windmill with blades that actually turned when she blew on them. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his curiosity breaking through his fog of worry. Sophia smiled. "My dad made it. He was a carpenter. He was really good." In that moment, something clicked in Richard's mind. Sophia's idea, which seconds before had seemed childish, suddenly took shape, gained contour, potential. Local production, sustainable, artisanal, with emotional appeal. A business with a soul, built on values, not just on profit and stock prices. It was risky, it was insane, it was completely different from anything he had ever done. But for the first time in months, He didn't feel fear. He felt a spark, a small, fragile but unmistakable spark of hope. The idea of a poor child, born amidst despair, could be the key to saving not just himself, but all of them. The spark of hope ignited by Sophia's idea grew into a small flame in Richard's mind. He spent the next few days immersed in a creative fever he hadn't felt in years. The makeshift office in his dining room, once an altar to despair, became a planning hub. He no longer had a team of analysts or consultants. His only advisors were a 6-year-old girl with a boundless imagination and her mother's practical wisdom. Helena, initially skeptical, started to get involved when she realized Richard's passion was genuine. She sketched designs for ragdolls and fabric animals based on folktales her grandmother used to tell her. Sophia, for her part, was the chief innovation officer. She imagined wooden puzzles, rubber band-powered cars, and modular dollhouses that could be assembled in different ways. Her creativity was pure, free from the constraints of, "Is this sellable?" that had always guided Richard's decisions. The project, which they named Village Toys, began to take shape. The premise was simple and powerful. Handcrafted toys, made from recycled and sustainable materials, produced by local artisans. Each toy would come with a small tag telling the story of the person who made it. It was a business that sold more than products. It sold connection, community, and purpose. Richard used his corporate knowledge to draft a business plan. He knew he needed some startup capital to buy raw materials and rent a modest space, a workshop, but his assets were frozen, and the banks shut their doors on him. The second obstacle, as terrifying as the first, was the custody battle for Laura. His ex-wife, Amanda, used his financial instability as her main argument. "How can you take care of a child if you can't even take care of yourself?" she said in a sharp phone call. "You're living in a fantasy world, Richard. Ragdolls aren't going to pay the bills." The pressure was immense. Amanda's lawyers were relentless, and the creditors sent increasingly threatening notices. Richard felt like he was trying to build a sandcastle as the tide came in. There were days when despair paralyzed him. He would look at Sophia's drawings, at Helena's sketches, and it all seemed like an impossible dream, a folly. On one particularly bleak afternoon, after a humiliating meeting with his bank manager, he came home defeated. Laura ran to hug him, the honey-colored teddy bear tucked under her arm. "Daddy, why are you sad again?" she asked, the innocence in her voice piercing his heart. In that moment, he realized the custody battle wasn't just about money. It was about the father he was becoming. He was more present, more attentive. He and Laura now spent afternoons at the park, not in shopping malls. They read stories. They didn't browse toy catalogs. He was becoming a better father in adversity, but how could he prove that to a judge who would only see his bank statements? Meanwhile, a delicate and powerful subplot was unfolding. Laura and Sophia met. Richard arranged the meeting with his heart in his throat, fearing the clash of two such different worlds. But children, as they do, ignored the barriers of adults. They connected instantly. Laura was fascinated by Sophia's imagination, by her ability to create entire worlds out of cardboard scraps and dry leaves. Sophia, in turn, was charmed by Laura's sweetness. They became inseparable, best friends. Their friendship was a balm, but also a source of additional pressure for Richard. Now he had two little girls looking to him, expecting him to do the impossible. To fail would not only mean his own ruin, but the separation of two kindred spirits. Seeing the pure joy on their faces as they played together in his living room with prototypes of village toys gave Richard the strength he needed. He was no longer fighting for an empire of money. He was fighting for a small kingdom of happiness, built on the friendship of two children. And for that kingdom, he was willing to face any giant. The idea, once a refuge from despair, now had to become a reality. Richard knew he couldn't get any traditional financing. His name was tarnished in the financial market. The word bankrupt preceded him into any meeting. He needed a different approach, something as out of the box as the concept of village toys itself. The answer, ironically, came from his past. He remembered dozens of former employees, talented and loyal people he had been forced to lay off during his company's collapse. They were engineers, designers, woodworkers, seamstresses, people who, like him, were struggling to get back on their feet. And there was one in particular he couldn't stop thinking about, Joseph, a master carpenter who had worked in his old company's prototyping department. Joseph was an artist with wood, capable of creating anything with a precision and passion Richard had rarely seen. He had been one of the first to be let go, one of the most painful cuts Richard had to make. With a heart heavy with shame, Richard sought out Joseph. He found him in a small garage workshop, repairing furniture to make ends meet. The reunion was tense. Joseph greeted him with an understandable coldness, resentment hanging in the air. "What do you want, Blackwood?" he asked, not stopping his work sanding a chair leg. "Come to offer me another severance package?" The question stung. Richard swallowed his pride. He didn't defend himself, didn't make excuses. He laid it all out. He told him everything. The loss of his fortune, the humiliation in the store, Sophia's story, the idea for the toys. He spread Sophia's childish drawings and Helena's sketches across the dusty workbench. "I don't have money to pay you a salary, Joseph," Richard said, his voice low and sincere. "I can't offer you shares in a company that doesn't exist. All I have is this idea, and I need you. I need your art." Joseph stopped sanding. He picked up the drawing of the windmill and studied it for a long time. His calloused fingers traced the simple yet ingenious lines. A flicker of recognition and pain crossed his eyes. "This drawing," he began, his voice thick. "I was the one who taught my son-in-law how to make these. He was good, very good, had a natural talent." Richard frowned, confused. "Your son-in-law?" Joseph looked at Richard, and the missing piece of Richard's life puzzle clicked into place with a dull, devastating thud. "Yes, Sophia's father. I'm her grandfather." The floor seemed to disappear from under Richard's feet. The world spun. Joseph continued, his voice laden with an old sorrow. "He worked for you, was one of your best guys in logistics, loyal, dedicated. You laid him off in the cuts. He never found another steady job, did odd jobs, struggled, and then he got sick. We didn't have the money for proper treatment. Helena never told you because she didn't want her daughter to grow up with hate. She wanted to protect the girl from resentment." The revelation was a punch to the gut. Richard staggered back, leaning against the wall. The man he had fired, whose life he had indirectly destabilized, was the father of the girl who had shown him the path to redemption. His journey was not a coincidence, not a random encounter with fate. It was a circle of consequences, an echo of his own cold, calculated decisions coming back to haunt him. He wasn't just helping a family in need, he was unknowingly trying to mend a fracture he himself had caused. Guilt, once a shadow, became a physical, crushing presence. He looked at Joseph, Sophia's grandfather, the man whose family he had hurt, and knew that building village toys was no longer a business venture, it was penance. It was the only way to honor the memory of a man he had dismissed as a number on a spreadsheet, a man whose legacy lived on in the brilliant mind of his daughter. Joseph's confession left Richard speechless. He stood there in the dusty workshop, the weight of his past actions crushing him. Every business decision he had ever made, every staff cut justified in the name of profit and efficiency, suddenly had a face, a story, a family. Sophia's father, a loyal man he had dismissed without a second thought. The irony was cruel and overwhelming. He had destroyed a family to save his empire, and now that man's daughter was offering him the tools to rebuild not just his life, but his soul. The silence between the two men was thick, filled with years of unspoken pain. Richard finally looked up, shame etched on his face. "Joseph, I didn't know. I am so sorry." The words felt inadequate. Pathetic in the face of the situation's enormity, Joseph sighed, a long, tired sound. He looked at the drawings scattered on the workbench. "Sorry doesn't bring my son-in-law back," he said, his voice hoarse. "But maybe we can build something for my granddaughter's future." In that moment, the ice between them broke. Joseph didn't forgive him, not right then, but he chose the future over the past. He accepted the partnership. With Joseph on board, the project gained extraordinary momentum. His skill as a craftsman was unparalleled. He turned Sophia's drawings into wooden prototypes of captivating beauty and simplicity. Helena, in turn, organized a small cooperative with other women in the neighborhood, seamstresses and artisans who were also struggling with unemployment. Joseph's garage became the first workshop for village toys. The sound of saws and sewing machines filled the air, a melody of hope and new beginnings. Richard, meanwhile, focused on strategy. He used what little he had left to create a simple but elegant website to present the project. He told the story behind the toys, the mission to create products with a soul, and to support the local community. The response was slow at first. Small orders from neighbors, from friends of friends. But the story was powerful, and word of mouth began to spread. The project's authenticity touched people in a way that large corporations couldn't. However, the initial success attracted the wrong kind of attention. His old competitors, men who had toasted his downfall, saw a story about the small venture on a local blog. They saw the idea, the potential, and greed spoke louder. One day, a man in an expensive suit with a fake smile showed up at Helena's door. He introduced himself as an angel investor, interested in helping the family. He offered Helena a sum of money that would take her breath away, enough money to buy a house, to secure Sophia's education, to never have to worry about rent or food again. In return, he wanted only one thing: the secrets behind village toys. Sophia's original drawings, Richard's business plans, Joseph's designs. He wanted to buy the soul of the project before it was even born, to mass-produce it in some distant factory, erasing its entire essence. "Think about it, Helena," the man said, his voice silky. "It's the chance of a lifetime. Richard Blackwood can't offer you this. He has nothing. He's just using you to try and get back on his feet." The offer was a diabolical temptation. For a woman who had spent her entire life fighting for every penny, that sum seemed like a miracle. She could give Sophia the life she had always dreamed of. But she looked at the man, at his cold, calculating eyes, and saw the same greed that had once destroyed her family. She thought of Richard, of how he was fighting not just for himself, but for all of them, with a humility she never imagined such a powerful man could possess. She thought of her daughter, whose act of kindness had started it all. To sell Sophia's idea would be to betray her own daughter's heart. With a dignity worth more than any fortune, Helena looked at the man and said, "Our soul isn't for sale." The battle, however, was far from over. The competitors would not take no for an answer. If they couldn't buy the idea, they would try to destroy it. And they knew exactly where to hit Richard to hurt him the most. His fatherhood. Helena's refusal was an act of courage, but also a declaration of war. Richard's competitors, frustrated in their hostile takeover attempt, changed tactics. The war would no longer be fought in boardrooms, but in the grim corridors of bureaucracy and public opinion. The first offensive came anonymously and cruelly. A report was filed with Child Protective Services. The allegations were vague but venomous. A bankrupt, emotionally unstable businessman maintaining an inappropriate relationship with a low-income family and involving his own daughter in an unsuitable environment. They were lies stitched together with half-truths. designed to paint Richard as a negligent father and an exploiter. The visit from the social worker was one of the worst days of Richard's life. A serious woman with a weary look asked probing questions about his financial situation, his sleeping habits, Laura's routine. She inspected the house, the refrigerator, the girls' room. Every question was a veiled accusation. Every note on her clipboard felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his fatherhood. The fear of losing Laura became a physical presence, a constant knot in his stomach. He tried to explain the Village Toys project, the genuine friendship between the families, but his words sounded defensive, desperate. The social worker listened with a chilling neutrality, promising a full investigation. The custody case, already a nightmare, gained a new and terrible ally against him. The next blow was even more painful because it came from within. Sophia, with the sharp intuition of children, began to sense the tension. She overheard the worried whispers between her mother and Richard. She saw the looks of pity and suspicion from neighbors. One day at school, a classmate repeated something he'd heard from his parents. "Your mum is hanging out with that man who lost all his money. Be careful. He'll take what little you have." The words, spoken with the casual cruelty of children, wounded Sophia deeply. She, who had only wanted to help, was becoming the source of problems for the people she loved. Her act of kindness in the toy store seemed to have unleashed a catastrophe. She began to withdraw. She became quiet, reserved. She stopped going to the makeshift workshop in her grandfather's garage. She stopped creating new toy designs. When Laura called her to play, she made excuses. The light in her eyes, the curiosity that moved the world, began to fade. Richard felt the change, and it broke him more than any legal threat. Sophia's joy was the fuel for the entire project. Without her, Village Toys was just soulless pieces of wood and cloth. He sought her out, finding her sitting alone in the same park where they had first spoken. "Sophia, what is it? Why are you pulling away?" he asked. Sitting beside her, she wouldn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on her worn shoes. "It's all my fault," she whispered. "Ever since I bought that bear, everything's gone bad. My mom lost her job. People are saying ugly things about you. And the lady from the government wants to take Laura away from you. Maybe if I stay away, everything will go back to normal." Hearing that was like a knife twisting in his chest. The girl who had saved him from the darkness was now blaming herself for everything. The cruelty of his enemies had achieved what a lack of money and humiliation could not. It had poisoned the very source of his hope. He tried to argue, to tell her none of it was her fault, that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. But she seemed not to hear, locked away in her own pain. Richard then realized the true nature of the battle. His competitors didn't just want to steal his idea. They wanted to destroy his spirit, to break his bonds, to isolate him in his failure. And they were using a child's purity to do it. Losing the company had been painful. Losing the house would be terrible. But losing the soul of this new beginning, losing Sophia's trust and joy, would be the final defeat. The fourth week began with the feeling of a noose tightening around Richard's neck. The preliminary report from the social worker arrived, and its words were a maze of technical jargon that, in some eyes, expressed serious concern. The custody hearing date was set. It was in 2 days. The final notice from the bank also arrived, cold and impersonal. The foreclosure was imminent. He had 48 hours to pay an impossible sum or lose the house. Every door seemed to be closing, every window locked. He was cornered, the air growing thin. The small workshop in Joseph's garage, once a haven of hope, now seemed like a memorial to a dying dream. Sophia remained distant, a silent ghost of her former joy, and her withdrawal was the deepest wound of all. He felt he had failed on every front, as a businessman, as a friend, and worst of all, as a father. It was in this abyss of despair that the phone rang. The number belonged to one of his fiercest former competitors, Marcus Adler, a man whose ambition was as vast as his lack of scruples. Richard almost didn't answer, but something, a final spark of survival instinct, made him lift the phone to his ear. Marcus's voice was smooth, almost friendly. "Richard, I hear you're in a tight spot. Perhaps we can talk. Lunch tomorrow. My treat. Think of it as a chat between old friends." It was a trap, Richard knew. But a drowning man doesn't refuse an outstretched hand, even if it belongs to a shark. They met at an exclusive restaurant, one of those places with linen tablecloths and silver cutlery, where Richard used to close multi-million-dollar deals. Marcus was impeccable in an Italian suit, exuding power and success. Richard, in his one good suit, felt like a ghost at the feast. After the empty formalities, Marcus got straight to the point. "I admire your tenacity, Richard. This little toy idea of yours. It's brilliant. Primitive, but brilliant. It has appeal, but you don't have the capital to make it fly. You're finished." He paused, savoring Richard's humiliation. "But I can help you. I have the resources. I have the influence." The offer was the lifeline Richard hadn't dared to dream of. Marcus offered to buy out all his debts, settle the mortgage on his house, and inject substantial capital into Village Toys. More than that, he casually mentioned that he knew the judge handling Laura's custody case. A quiet word in the right place, and the CPS investigation would disappear. Richard's life would be handed back to him on a silver platter. His shoulders, tense for months, relaxed for an instant. Hope, terrible and seductive, flooded his chest. He could keep his house. He could keep his daughter. "And what do you want in return?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse. Marcus's smile widened. "Total control, of course. 51% of the shares. You'll be the creative face, I'll be the business brain, and we'll have to make a few operational adjustments." And then came the blow. That woman, Helena, she's a liability. A former waitress doesn't fit our brand image. We'll have to let her go. And the old carpenter, the girl's grandfather, he can stay in the workshop, but off the board, we need professionals. The air left Richard's lungs. The choice was there, stark and naked on the mahogany table. On one side, security, his daughter, his home, the chance to rise again. On the other, Helena, Joseph, Sophia, his integrity. The voice of the old Richard, the ruthless tycoon, screamed in his mind, "Take it, it's just business. Sacrifice the pawns to save the king." He saw Laura's face, smiling safe in her bedroom, but then he saw Sophia's face, dimmed and sad, betrayed by the man she had helped. He saw Helena's tired face and Joseph's silent dignity. He remembered Sophia's words in the store, "I know how it hurts, but I can live without it." He finally understood what she meant. There were some things you couldn't live without, and your soul was one of them. Richard looked up and met Marcus's predatory gaze. For the first time in a long time, he felt no fear. He felt clarity. "No," he said, his voice calm and firm. Marcus blinked, surprised. "No, my assets are no longer for sale." "Marcus," Richard continued, standing up, "especially the ones that are priceless." He turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the offer, the security, and a dumbfounded Marcus Adler. As he stepped out into the sunlight, Richard felt the crushing weight of his decision. He had chosen honor, and in doing so, he had just sentenced himself to lose absolutely everything. Richard left the restaurant certain he had signed his own death warrant. The relief of having kept his integrity was quickly replaced by a wave of cold panic. He had less than 24 hours. The custody hearing was the next morning. The foreclosure, soon after. He didn't have a plan, didn't have a miracle. He only had the conviction of his choice. When he got home, he found Helena and Joseph waiting for him on his doorstep. Their faces were tense with worry. "We heard about Marcus's offer," Helena said. An old co-worker of mine from the cafe overheard the conversation and called me, "Richard, you shouldn't have refused on our account." Richard looked at them, his partners, his new family. "I didn't refuse for you," he said, his voice steady. "I refused for me, for who I want to be." That night, Richard's house, once a sanctuary of silence and worry, was filled with life. Helena brought a simple dinner. Joseph fixed a broken chair. Laura, sensing the change in atmosphere, got out her paints and began a picture of two families standing side by side. Only Sophia was missing. Richard's heart ached at her absence. He knew he had to fix that, regardless of what happened in court. He left a message for Helena, asking her to bring Sophia to the hearing the next day. It was a strange request, but she agreed without question. The courtroom was cold and impersonal. Amanda, his ex-wife, was there with her lawyer, exuding confidence. Her lawyer presented the case brutally. Richard's financial losses, his instability, the CPS investigation, the questionable influence of Helena's family. The judge, a man with a severe face, flipped through the mountain of documents that proved Richard's failure. The situation seemed hopeless. When it was Richard's turn to speak, he stood not as a businessman trying to defend his assets, but as a father. He didn't talk about money, stocks, or deals. He talked about what he had learned. "Your Honor, these documents show that I lost a fortune. And that's true. I lost money, property, prestige, but they don't show what I gained." He spoke about Laura's drawing of him as a little grey man and how it had woken him up. He spoke about the kindness of a little girl who sacrificed her savings for a stranger. He spoke about what was more important to a child's upbringing, a room full of expensive toys or a heart full of empathy and values. "I cannot offer my daughter the material wealth her mother can," he concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can offer her a father who knows the difference between price and value, a father who is learning, with the help of incredible people, how to be a better man. And I beg you to give me the chance to keep showing her that." At that moment, Helena entered the courtroom, holding Sophia's hand. The girl looked small and frightened. The judge looked at them, his brow furrowed. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard took a deep breath. "Your Honor, this is Sophia, the inspiration behind my new life. There is something I need you to see." He took a small object from his pocket and placed it on the table. It was the wooden windmill made by Sophia's father. "This toy was made by a man I fired," Richard said, "a good man whose memory I dishonored, and it was his daughter, with her wisdom and forgiveness, who taught me about second chances." He turned to Sophia. "Sophia, I know you're scared and feeling guilty, but you didn't cause any of this. You started something wonderful. You saved me, and I will never let the cruelty of other people dim your light." Tears streamed down Sophia's face. She ran and hugged Richard. The embrace of a child, in the midst of a court's cold formality, was a powerful image. It was then that the unexpected happened. A woman stood up at the back of the room. It was the saleswoman from the toy store. Her face was pale. "Your Honor, I need to say something." With a trembling voice, she confessed everything. She confessed that she was the one who made the anonymous report to CPS on Marcus Adler's orders in exchange for money. She confessed that she had been the one passing on information about Richard's struggles. "I would see Mr. Blackwood come into the store, looking at the toys, and I judged him," she said, crying. "But today I saw everything, and I can't be a part of this anymore." Amanda's lawyer was dumbfounded. Marcus Adler's house of cards collapsed. The judge looked at the scene, at Richard and Sophia's embrace, at the saleswoman's confession, and his stern face softened. He banged his gavel. "Case dismissed. Custody remains with the father." The first victory was won. As they left the courthouse, Richard's phone buzzed. It was Joseph. "Richard, turn on the TV, quick!" On a local news channel, the story was exploding. A reporter who had been in the courtroom covering another case had witnessed everything and put the story on the air. The headline read, "Fallen Tycoon Finds True Wealth in a Child's Kindness." The Village Toys website, which had been getting a trickle of orders, was being flooded by an avalanche of traffic. Their story, the truth, was more powerful than any marketing campaign. The second victory wasn't just keeping custody, but watching the start of his dream's recovery, powered by truth and decency. The story that unfolded in the courtroom reverberated through the city like a shockwave. It was no longer about a bankrupt businessman. It was a powerful narrative of redemption, community, and the unlikely friendship between two worlds. The Village Toys website crashed several times due to the volume of traffic. Orders poured in from every corner of the country, not just for the toys, but for what they represented. Each purchase was a vote of confidence, an act of support for the small company that dared to put people over profit. The capital Richard couldn't get from banks came from the public, from hundreds of small investments, from people touched by the story. Joseph's garage became too small. With the new funds, they rented an old warehouse in the neighborhood and transformed it into a vibrant, light-filled workshop. Richard made a point of rehiring every loyal employee he could find, those who, like Sophia's father, had been let go during his downfall. He didn't just offer them jobs, he offered them profit-sharing, making them partners in his new beginning. Helena, once a cleaner and waitress, became the chief operating officer, her efficiency and common sense proving to be a natural talent for management. Joseph led the creative department, a master artisan teaching his craft to a new generation. And Sophia had the most important title of all. She was the Chief Inspiration Officer, with her own small desk in the corner of the workshop, where she drew, dreamed, and reminded everyone why they were there. Richard set up an educational fund in her name, securing not only her future, but that of other children in the neighborhood. Richard's final victory wasn't measured in dollars, euros, or stock prices. It was measured in the smiles that now filled his life. He kept his house, not through a financial miracle, but because the community, upon learning of his struggle, organized a crowdfunding campaign to help him pay off the mortgage. It was a lesson in humility that marked him forever. He, who had once prided himself on his self-sufficiency, learned to accept help. Amanda, his ex-wife, witnessing his transformation, laid down her arms. She saw that Laura had something her money couldn't buy, a present, happy father with a purpose. They established an amicable shared custody agreement, putting their daughter's well-being above any resentment. 4 weeks after that humiliating day in the Crystal Carousel, Richard's life was unrecognizable. The empire he rebuilt was not made of assets and liabilities, but of human bonds. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, he sat on the porch of his house, watching Laura and Sophia play in the yard. They ran on the grass, their laughter echoing in the air. The famous honey-colored teddy bear passing from hand to hand, now a mascot of their inseparable friendship. Helena and Joseph were with him, drinking coffee, planning the future of the company that was now a family. Richard looked at the scene and felt a peace that no fortune had ever given him. He had lost millions of dollars, but he had found something infinitely more valuable. He discovered that true success isn't measured by the heights you reach, but by how many people you help lift up along the way. The little girl who spent her last coins to make a stranger happy hadn't just bought a toy. She had invested in humanity, and her return was an empire of compassion. The store that was the stage for prejudice and humiliation became, in the city's memory, the birthplace of a new business philosophy. A place where a simple teddy bear became the eternal symbol that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters.